There is a cost to safety that nobody tells you about when you're young. A cost that doesn't show up on any statement, that doesn't announce itself in moments of crisis, that reveals itself slowly over decades in the shape of a life that was protected but never fully lived. Most people spend their entire financial lives playing it safe, and they think safe means secure. They think it means smart. They think it means responsible. And in some ways it is all of those things. But safe also means something else. Something that only becomes visible after enough years have passed that the pattern is unmistakable. Safe means small. Safe means contained. Safe means a life designed around the avoidance of risk rather than the pursuit of anything that might require it. And the hidden cost of that, the one that compounds silently in the background while you're busy protecting yourself from losses you might never have experienced, is the life you didn't live because you were too afraid of what it might cost you. This is not about recklessness. This is about something quieter and far more common, the way an entire life can be shaped by the fear of financial loss, the way that fear, once it takes root, changes every decision, not just the big ones, the small ones, the daily ones, the accumulation of choices made not because they moved you towards something you wanted, but because they kept you away from something you were afraid of. And the problem with organizing a life around the avoidance of loss is that you also avoid possibility. You avoid growth. You avoid the experiences that only exist on the other side of risk. And by the time you realize what you traded for safety, the years have already been spent. And what you're left with is not security. It's a smaller life than the one you might have lived if you'd been willing to risk more. Here is what playing it safe actually looks like. It starts early. You take the stable job instead of the interesting one. You stay in the career that pays reliably even after it stops feeling meaningful. You don't start the business. You don't make the move. You don't take the leap into something uncertain because the risk feels too big, and you tell yourself there will be time later. But later never comes, or it comes and you're older, and the risk feels even bigger. So you stay. You keep playing it safe. You keep choosing the option that protects what you have over the option that might give you something more. And you tell yourself this is wisdom, this is prudence, but it is also a kind of imprisonment, a life lived inside the walls of what feels financially safe, which over time becomes indistinguishable from the walls of what feels emotionally tolerable. The thing about safety is that it's relative. What feels safe at 30 feels confining at 50. What felt like protection at 40 feels like limitation at 60. Because safety, by definition, is about preserving what you already have. And the longer you organize your life around preservation, the less there is to preserve. Not in terms of money, in terms of aliveness, in terms of the feeling that your life is still generating new experiences rather than simply maintaining old ones. The people who play it safe with money often end up wealthy in the technical sense. They have savings, they have assets, they have security, at least on paper. But when you sit with them, when you listen to the way they talk about their lives, what you hear underneath the security is regret. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that sounds like, I wish I had. I always thought I would. I used to dream about, and then the sentence trails off, because finishing it would require acknowledging that the dream was traded for something that felt more important at the time, but turns out not to have been. Here is the hidden cost, the one that only becomes visible in retrospect. Playing it safe doesn't just protect you from loss, it protects you from life. From the parts of life that require uncertainty, that require putting something at risk in order to gain something you don't currently have. And those parts, the uncertain ones, are where almost everything meaningful happens. Not just in terms of money, in terms of identity, growth, connection, the feeling that you are still becoming rather than simply maintaining. The people who spend their lives avoiding financial risk often spend their lives avoiding other kinds of risk too. Emotional risk, relational risk, the risk of being seen, the risk of failing, the risk of wanting something and not getting it. And what they end up with after decades of avoidance is a life that feels manageable but not expansive, comfortable but not alive, secure but not full. And the question that eventually arrives, usually too late to do much about it, is whether the security was worth what it cost, whether the life you protected was the life you actually wanted to live. The financial industry will never tell you this. No one will ever tell you that there is a cost to being too conservative, that there is a risk in avoiding all risk, because their incentive is to keep you afraid, to keep you focused on protection and preservation and the avoidance of loss. Because afraid people save more, they invest more carefully, they follow the plan. And the plan, almost always, is designed to help you hold on to what you have, not to help you become something more than you currently are. But holding on is not the same as living. And at some point, if you've been holding on long enough, you start to notice the weight of it, the way it requires constant vigilance, constant calculation, constant attention to what might go wrong, and you realize that the life you built to keep yourself safe has become a life defined by fear. Not dramatic fear, not the kind that paralyzes, the manageable kind, the kind you've learned to live with, the kind that shapes your choices so gradually you stop noticing it's there, until one day you do notice, and you realize it's been there the whole time, shaping everything, narrowing everything, keeping you inside the boundaries of what feels safe, which over the years has become a much smaller space than you ever intended it to be. There is a particular kind of person who suffers most from this. It's not the person who has nothing to lose. It's the person who has just enough to lose that losing it feels unbearable. The person who has built something, saved something, accumulated something, and now spends the rest of their life terrified of the possibility that it might disappear. That person makes every decision through the lens of protection. And protection, over time, becomes indistinguishable from paralysis. They don't take the trip because the market is volatile. They don't help the family member because it might compromise their retirement. They don't spend on the experience because the money feels safer in the account. They don't make the move or the change or the leap because the risk of losing what they have is more vivid than the possibility of gaining what they don't. And the tragedy is that they often die with more money than they needed, with accounts that could have funded a dozen different versions of the life they were afraid to live. And no one inherits that regret. It just disappears, along with all the experiences that were never had and all the versions of themselves they never became because they were too busy protecting the version they already were. This is not an argument against saving. It is not an argument against planning or prudence or financial responsibility. It is an argument against letting fear become the organizing principle of your financial life. Because when fear is in charge, the goal is no longer to build something. The goal is to avoid losing what you've already built. And that is a fundamentally defensive posture. It keeps you focused on the past, on what you have, on what might be taken away, rather than on the future, on what might still be possible, on what you might still become if you were willing to risk something in the pursuit of it. The people who live the fullest lives are not the ones who avoided all risk. They are the ones who learned to take the right risks, who understood that some things are worth risking money for, that some experiences, some opportunities, some versions of themselves are more valuable than the security of knowing the account balance will never go down. There is a moment that comes, usually late, when the cost of playing it safe becomes impossible to ignore. It comes when you realize that the money you saved, the security you built, the risk you avoided, did not actually protect you from the thing you were most afraid of. It did not protect you from regret. It did not protect you from the feeling that you missed something, that you played it too small, that you were so focused on making sure you didn't lose
that you forgot to make sure you actually lived. And that realization, when it comes, is one of the most painful things a person can experience. Not because you lost something, but because you never risked enough to gain it in the first place. Because the life you were protecting turned out to be smaller than the one you were capable of living. And by the time you understood that, the years were gone. The energy was gone. The time when things still felt possible had passed. And what you're left with is the question that has no good answer. What was it all for? What was the safety protecting?
Loss. Because those are the conditions under which growth happens, under which meaning gets made, under which you discover what you're capable of. And if you spend your entire life avoiding those conditions because they feel financially dangerous, what you end up with is not safety. You end up with stagnation, with a life that never quite left the starting line because you were too afraid of what might happen if you actually started running. The hidden cost of playing it safe with money is not financial. It is existential. It is the cost of spending your one life in a defensive crouch, of making every decision through the filter of what you might lose rather than what you might gain, of arriving at the end and realizing that the security you built was not worth the life you didn't live to build it. And the worst part is that by the time most people realize this, they are too old to do much about it. The window for risk has closed. The energy for starting over is gone. The time when a different choice might have led to a different life has passed. And all that's left is the money, sitting there, in accounts that were supposed to deliver freedom, but instead delivered a life that was smaller, quieter, more contained than it needed to be. Because somewhere along the way, safety became more important than aliveness. And by the time that trade became visible, it was too late to undo it. The life had already been lived, and the cost, the hidden cost, was the life that might have been.